All right, it's time to bring a front end into this. So the first thing we're going to do is head over to the repo and clone the React front end locally. You can find this repo at jaster11 or github.com/jaster11/rate-my-setup-react-starter. So go ahead and grab that repo or that link right there, and then click on the code and clone it, or copy that link and then run git clone and then paste in the URL. Oh, actually, I don't want to do that there. I want to do that. Actually, yeah, I want to do that one back. Excuse me. So cd ... and then go ahead and git clone it here. Then make sure to install the dependencies with npm install. First, let's navigate into that directory. Rate my setup React starter. Great. I'm actually going to remove git because we'll use our own git here. Excuse me, .git. Make sure I can type. Great. And then I'm going to git init a new one. Lovely. And then I'm going to npm install all of the dependencies. So while those install, let's take a look at this really quickly. We have a few things here. First, let's actually take a look at the source components app.js here. And these are the components that are available to us in this application. The app, home, icons, login, etc., some other cool things. But the one I want to look at really quickly is this app.js file. And inspecting the app.js file, notice that first of all, that the app has a useEffect hook here that fetches all the posts from the back end as soon as it mounts. So that's what's happening right here. Basically, we set is fetching to true, and then we run a try catch block where we hit the endpoint to grab all of the posts. And if we get data back, we set those posts into application state. Otherwise, we set an error message, and then finally we set is fetching to false. Now, once it grabs all those posts, it's going to pass them, and here we can see a few other methods that we'll take a look at. We'll component render. It renders a set of routes and a nav bar, and the main route here that we're looking at first is this home route. And this home route is where it passed all those posts to. And so the home route will render all of those posts. Let's take a look at that one next. Cool. Nothing crazy here. It accepts the authenticated user, the list of posts, and a few other things, and then renders two sections. The new post form and a list of posts. Maps over all the posts if it has them, and uses the post component to render a series of posts. And so again, nothing crazy here. And we can actually let's take a look at that because it might make a little more sense if we actually see it in action. So since these dependencies have finished installing, let's look at them with npm start. Okay. So we see this is what it looks like at the moment. We have this network error that exists because we don't have a backend running. So we should probably set that up at least. Let's make sure that backend is running. So we'll head into our backend. And let's take a look at it. We'll cd into rate my setup API and make sure this is running. npm start. Okay, looks good. And then we will head back over to our client. Let's refresh this really quickly. Let's also inspect it just to make sure. Cool, looks good. Console. We see there is an error. Let's refresh this. Ah, there we go. So we see our posts set up. That looks pretty good. Not bad. Looking good enough. I like the way this is working. So it seems that we have some posts. We're rendering the user's email. And we have a place to create a new post, but it says we cannot do that because we must be authenticated. So all looks good. Let's take a look at the login page. Cool with the login form here. That's nice. Let's try signing up as a new user. Okay. We'll say lebron@james.io. Password will be password. Confirm password. Create account. Cool. Looks like that worked. And we're now logged in, and we can see that it looks pretty good. We have the user's email here. That looks nice. And looking at the network tab, if we take a look at this request really quickly, we'll see that we returned a token, which is what we want. That's perfect. We have this token here. Looks like we have a way to authenticate our user. This is all looking nice. Let's try to create a post. new post. I'm just going to put a fake URL in. Ooh, I have one here. Perfect. Thanks for doing that for me, Google. Submit. Uh-oh. And we get an error, an unauthorized error. And remember why that is. Since we're not including our JWT token in the response header, our server has no idea who we are and is throwing an unauthenticated error whenever we make a request to a protected endpoint. All the unprotected endpoints work, like fetching posts like we have here, but the others won't. And if we click on a post, say for instance, and we want to give it a rating, we'll try that here, and we'll save the rating. Same problem here. So the thing is here, we need a way to store that JSON web token, that JWT, in our application somewhere and send it to the server each time we make a request. And here's another issue, by the way. If we go back to the home and we click refresh and see what happens. Uh-oh, check that out. We're not logged in anymore. Just like that. Why is that? Well, when we hit refresh, we get a fresh React application that initializes its state values to whatever we set in initial state. For us, that means, if we look at app, that all of this info we saved about the user, the posts, error is fetching all this stuff, it's reset to the initial values. So we might have to log in all over again every time we refresh our app, and that is not an experience users are going to be okay with. So what's the solution? Well, it's actually multi-layered. The first thing we need to do is store the token we receive when authenticating and make sure we include it in all of our requests to the API. But that would mean we're passing the token to every Axios request in our application. So like here, we'd have to pass it, and like if we look at post detail, for instance, this one right here, we're making a request here, we're making a request here, we're making a request here. So we'd be passing that token all over the place, and things would start to get a little bit out of hand with all these requests spread all over our application. So instead of doing that, we're going to centralize all of our API requests in a single place so that we don't have to repeat ourselves so much. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a new directory called services. And in that directory, we're going to create a file called APIClient.js. So here in the source, I want you to create a new folder in the source directory called services. And inside that services directory, we're going to create a new file called APIClient.js. Just like that. And inside it, we're going to initialize a new API client class. And the first thing it's going to do is it's going to import Axios. So we're going to import Axios from Axios, and we're going to create this API client with a constructor that will set the API URL, the base URL that will make all of our requests to. So the remote host URL will be the place we set that will actually make our requests to. So this.remote host URL is equal to remote host URL. And this.token is equal to null. So we'll start off by setting the token to null. And then we will actually export this client. So we'll say export default new API client. Like that. So we are instantiating a new instance of this API client class. And each one should have its own token and remote host URL. Now, at the moment, that would be null. So let's give it a value. Let's say that either it's set in the environment, process.env.react.app remote host URL, or we're in dev mode, and we'll just use localhost 3001. Straightforward enough. Now, back in this API client class, let's do a few things. Let's add a method to set the token on this instance whenever we want. So we'll just say this.token is equal to token whenever we pass it in. And we'll also create a utility request method. Now, this is where the meat of the API client comes to play. Basically, we're going to create this method, just called request, that accepts an object, a configuration object that has the endpoint, the method that we're using, which will default to get, and any data we are passing in, which will default to an empty object. Then it's going to create the whole URL from the remote host URL, the base URL. Maybe I should have just named it base URL. And then we'll also concatenate on the endpoint. Afterwards, we'll create a headers object here. Const headers equals content type application JSON, like this. And then if there are any headers, so we'll say if, or if this contains a token, if this.token, this instance has a token attached to it, we will set the authorization header on the headers object. So we'll say headers authorization, and I probably could have done that with dot, but whatever, is equal to bearer this.token. So if the token exists on this instance, attach this authorization header that'll make sure that we're authenticated with each request. This way we only have to attach the token in one place instead of all over the place in our application. Finally, we actually do the request, and we'll contain it in a try-catch block so that we don't have to try-catch anywhere else when we make Axios requests, which is actually really nice. And so we're going to do two things. The first is we're going to say const res equals await Axios, and we're going to pass it an object with the URL, the method, the data, and the headers. And, did I spell that wrong? Yeah. We're using interesting syntax here, by the way. Like, instead of explicitly calling axios.post or axios.get, we just call Axios and then pass a config object with the URL, the method, the data, the headers, so that we can use this same request method for all of our requests, regardless of the HTTP method that's being used. And so then, if all goes well here, we'll return an object with a data key that has the res.data and an error key with null. And we're just doing this to standardize the way that the response returned from this request method works. And then down here, if anything goes wrong, let's console.error the error. Let's just say error response error.response. I'm going to use the full error here just to be explicit. And we don't have to keep that there. Maybe we'd use console.debug or something, but we'll keep that there for now. And then we'll say, let's actually try and extract that message that we are sending from our backend, which is weird. I'm just going to use error, and I'm going to do a lot of optional chaining here. .response, .data, .error, .message. And honestly, I got this just by parsing through the response a while ago. So if this is wrong, let me know, but I'm pretty sure this is what it needs to be. Actually, we'll find out pretty quickly. And if that error happens, we'll just return an object where data is null, and the error is either the message if we found it, or we'll just stringify that error and work from there. And cool. So now we have this utility API client class that we can use all over our application. But how do we actually use it? Well, to give you an example, let's add two methods near the bottom of the class that are responsible for logging in users and signing up users. So right down here, we could say async login user, and we'll pass in the credentials. And then we just return await this.request with the endpoint, which is auth/login, and the method, which is post, and the data, which is the credentials. Simple enough, right? And in fact, that's basically the exact same thing that our sign-up user is going to do. Sign-up user. And instead of to the login endpoint, we'll do it to the register endpoint. And so this is the power of centralizing all of our requests into a single class, is that we can use a utility method like this to standardize all of our requests. They all look pretty similar. They all work the same. We don't have to write all this extra code, a bunch of try-catch blocks everywhere. We centralize that in one location, and that makes our code much easier to work with. So whenever we want to hit a certain endpoint, we'll just call this.request with the endpoint, method, and data. Let's actually go ahead and update the login and register components to use this new API client. So open the register component, and then just make a little change inside the handle on submit function. So I'm going to save this first. Then I'm going to go into the register component here and look for this handle on submit. See this right here? Now, this is where we're doing the actual request itself. So instead, let's actually no longer import Axios from Axios, and let's import the API client from services //services/API client. And then here, I'm just going to do this over. I'm going to say, or maybe I'll just comment out this whole try-catch block here, and we'll do this differently. Ready? So instead of all of that crazy try-catch stuff, all we're going to do, because remember it's already handled inside our API client, we'll just say const data error equals await API client dot sign up user, and we'll send the email with form.email and the password with form.password. Then we'll say if error set errors. We'll just do the same thing here, right? We'll set the errors, but instead of just doing the whole thing, we'll just say form error. And if data, if we have some data, or actually, yeah, let's say if data.user, for instance, because we want the user, we'll set the user of data.user. And then the other cool thing is we have this token here. We know that, so we can say API client dot set token data.token. And this will make sure that all requests from now on are authenticated. So that's actually great. But let's make sure we handle the login component as well before we move on from here. So I'm going to save this, head to the login component, do the exact same thing. I'm going to comment this out. We no longer need it. I'm going to say import API client from ... / services API client. I've been talking for so long now. And then we'll do the same thing. We'll look in the handle on submit. Here it is. And we'll comment out that whole try catch block since we no longer need it. And we'll just do that same thing. Const data error. Let's actually, you know what? I'm copying it because I don't have time for this. Because it's going to be the same thing, right? We could probably even standardize that a little bit. But instead of saying API client dot sign up user, we'll say API client login user. And then, if errors, we'll set the errors to the form error to error. And if the data.user, we'll set the user as data.user and set the API client, set the token. But we do need to set is processing to false at the end of this. Otherwise, it'll be processing forever. And let's make sure I did the same thing actually in the register component. I comment that out too, so let's add that at the end. Ta-da! And there we go. And so now this should actually work. If we head back to our setup, we should be able to, or our client, we should be able to sign up with a new user. Let's go Serena Williams. And we'll do password as her password as well. And we'll create an account. Looks good. Now let's go ahead and make a, or actually let's refresh because we know it's gonna clear, right? Since we still didn't fix that part. Okay, looks good. But now let's try and log in with Serena. Make sure that still works. Serena at williams.io, password. Ah, that still works. Okay, great. Now let's try to create a new post. Something nice. Ta-da! Ah, we still need to convert that one to use the API client also. Okay, I know this video is long, but we're almost done. Let's add a new method to the API client class. One more. And this one will be responsible for creating a post. We'll say async, create post, return await this dot request to the endpoint, posts, method, post, data, post, lots of post. And then in the new post form, let's go in there and update that one to use the API client as well. From ... / services / API client. And we'll do the same thing here, comment out this whole try catch block. And let's just make sure to set is loading to false at the end. Great. And let's say const data error equals await API client dot create post. Caption is form.caption. And image URL is form.image URL. And then we'll say if error. I said set error, same thing. Yeah, we'll just say set error with the error. And if data, we'll add post, data.post, and set the form to a blank form. Cool. So if we save this and go back, hopefully now that will work. Let's find out. Let's submit. Okay, still didn't work. So let's try this again, actually. Let's log in. Let's refresh. Log in. Serena@williams.io. Password is password. Okay, cool. Something nice. And let's submit. Oh, and there we go. It was gummy bears. Okay, that might not have been the image I wanted, but look at that. So it actually works. Now we are talking. We still haven't solved the problem where we refresh the page, the user's logged out, but we can now send authenticated requests to our backend, and that's really exciting. So in this last part, we'll handle making sure that a user stays logged in when they're logged in. But for now, let's go ahead and commit our work on the front end. So we'll stop this. We'll say git status, everything, git add, git commit, have authenticated requests working. Boom, there we go.